Every 6 hours, a tunnel under the Hudson River rises and falls. The movement is small. Nobody riding through it would ever feel it. But the engineers who built it noticed, and the decision they made about it in the spring of 1908 is still holding up the busiest stretch of railroad in the United States. 2 tubes run beneath the river between New Jersey and Manhattan. One takes trains east into the city, one takes them west. There is no third tube, no bridge, no detour. Around 200,000 people pass through those 2 holes in the mud every day, which is roughly the population of Salt Lake City moving through a pair of pipes laid down before the First World War. They opened in 1910. In 2012, a hurricane pushed the ocean into them. The water was pumped out within days. The salt was not, and the chemistry it started is still working through the concrete right now. America is spending $16 billion to build a replacement. It is scheduled to open in 2035. The last man to publicly assess how much life the old tunnel had left gave it about 20 years, and he said that in 2014. Manhattan is an island, and for most of American history, that was a serious commercial problem. Every railroad running west of the Hudson stopped dead at the New Jersey shoreline. Passengers got off, boarded a ferry, and crossed the water. Freight was unloaded, carried over, and loaded again. The greatest port city in the country could be reached from the west only by boat, and in a hard winter, when ice choked the river, sometimes not at all. The tunnels that finally solved it are still doing the job. They run from Weehawken on the New Jersey side, through the rock of the Palisades, out under the riverbed, and into Penn Station. Beneath the Hudson, they sit around 100 feet under the water, with ocean-going ships passing overhead. Trains move through them at 60 miles an hour, one at a time, in single file. Everything about the region sits on top of that arrangement. New Jersey Transit runs its entire Manhattan service through those 2 tubes. So does Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, the line connecting Washington to Boston, which serves a region generating around 1/5 of the national economy. Anyone who commutes in from the west already knows what that dependency feels like on a small scale. A train stalls in the wrong tube on a Thursday morning, and within 20 minutes, the platforms at Newark are full. Tickets are being cross-honored on buses and ferries, and people who left home on time are standing shoulder to shoulder watching a departure board with nothing useful on it. The cause is almost never dramatic. Something electrical, usually in a wall built when Taft was president. Those mornings resolve by lunchtime. The Hudson spent most of the 19th century humiliating anyone who tried to get under it. The problem was the riverbed. Engineers expected rock, or at least something they could push against. What they found was silt, a deep bed of soft gray mud that behaved less like ground and more like a very slow liquid. Cut into it, and it closed behind you. In the 1870s, a man named DeWitt Clinton Haskin decided he had the answer. His idea was compressed air. Pump the working chamber full of it, hold the mud back with pressure alone, and let men dig their way across inside a bubble. The men doing that digging were called sandhogs. They worked in air pressurized well beyond anything the human body is built for, in heat and permanent damp, cutting mud by hand and lining the hole behind them with iron and brick. Progress ran to 4 or 5 feet on a good day. Nobody understood yet what the pressure was doing to them. Men came out of the airlocks with crippling joint pain, and some of them never walked properly again. Haskin's crews worked without a shield to support the face. The silt, they believed, was strong enough to hold the air by itself. On the morning of the 21st of July, 1880, the air found a way out. A leak opened at the top of the tunnel around 4:30. Compressed air escaped upward through the mud toward the river, and once it had a path, the hole widened fast. Water and silt came in behind it. 28 men were underground, about 300 feet out from shore. An assistant superintendent named Peter Woodland got 8 of them into an airlock and sealed it shut. He stayed on the other side with the rest. None of the 20 men left in the chamber survived. Haskin never finished. The bore sat abandoned and flooded under the river for years, changed hands twice, and was eventually completed by other men. It became the crossing that PATH trains use today. The tunnel this story is about came later and further north, built by a different railroad entirely. By the time work started on it, everyone in New York knew what was under that water. The Pennsylvania went in anyway. The Pennsylvania Railroad was not building a tunnel. It was building an entrance to New York. Its main line would come under the Hudson into a new station in the middle of Manhattan, then carry on east under the East River to reach Queens and Long Island. 6 river crossings, a station covering several city blocks, and miles of approach track, all commissioned at once, and all of it paid for by the company itself. The man they hired to get under the Hudson was Charles Jacobs, a British engineer who had already put a gas line beneath the East River. Jacobs did not try to overpower the mud. He used a shield, a steel cylinder pushed forward through the silt by hydraulic rams. Men dug at the face inside the protection of the shield. Cast iron rings were bolted into place behind them, and the whole assembly inched forward again. The compressed air still held the water back, but now a permanent structure was going up inside the bubble as it advanced. The crossing was really 2 different tunnels wearing the same name. On the New Jersey side, it had to punch through the hard rock ridge behind the shoreline. Out under the river, all of that discipline gave way to mud. Work began in 1904 from both banks and from shafts sunk out in the riverbed. 4 separate faces, advancing toward each other in the dark with 1900 survey equipment and no way to see where anybody else was. The air was thick and hot. Mud came at the face in slabs. Sandhogs worked shifts measured against pressure limits nobody entirely trusted, and the men who had been down longest moved with a stiffness that never left them. The tubes crept toward each other for 4 years. They met, and the alignment held. Jacobs had done what the river had prevented for 30 years. Then he started reading the survey gauges. The instruments were routine. Engineers wanted to confirm the tubes were sitting where they had been placed. They were not. The tunnel was moving, not settling, which would have been expected and manageable, but rising and dropping in a steady rhythm over and over with no obvious cause. The cast iron tubes were not resting on bedrock. They were floating in silt, and something was lifting them. For most of 2 years, nobody could explain it. The measurements kept coming, and the movement stayed exactly the same. On the 3rd of October, 1907, Jacobs put the answer in front of the Board of Engineers. He had matched the survey readings against the tide tables, and the times lined up perfectly. The moment of high water in the river above was the exact moment the tunnel sat at its lowest measured point. Every man in that room knew the Hudson was tidal. Not one of them had imagined the tide was strong enough to move something that size. Twice a day, the river was pressing their tunnel down into the mud. Twice a day, it was letting it float back up. There had always been a plan for this. The design included screw piles, steel columns driven down through the shell of the tubes and anchored into the bedrock underneath, pinning the tunnel in place permanently. Jacobs wanted them installed. 2 other members of the board agreed with him. Samuel Rea, the Pennsylvania Railroad executive running the project, did not. His argument was that pinning a moving tunnel to something rigid was the more dangerous option. Anchor the tubes to bedrock while the silt around them keeps shifting, and all that stress ends up concentrated on the anchors, which could tear open the iron shell they were meant to protect. Better, he said, to let the tunnel move with the ground it sat in. He studied the readings for 2 more years before deciding. On the 8th of May, 1908, Rea informed the board that the piles would not be installed. Having considered the matter carefully, he wrote, he had concluded they were neither necessary nor advisable. The tunnel was left floating in the mud. It has been rising and falling with the tide ever since. At the Manhattan end, the Pennsylvania Railroad was building a station to receive the tunnel, and the station was designed to make an argument. Pink granite colonnades on the outside, a waiting room modeled on the baths of Caracalla, big enough to hold a cathedral, a steel and glass concourse that filled with daylight and made the trains beneath it look almost incidental. Penn Station opened in November 1910. The tunnels opened with it. Trains from Chicago, Washington, and Philadelphia ran directly into the middle of Manhattan for the first time in history. The ferry transfer that had cost every westbound traveler hours simply stopped existing. The tunnel Jacobs built became invisible almost immediately, the way successful infrastructure always does. It was 30 seconds of darkness on a long journey. Nobody thought about the mud, the shields, the pressure, or the 20 men who had drowned under the same river a generation earlier. The station did not last. It was demolished in the 1960s and replaced with a low-ceilinged warren beneath a sports arena, in a decision New York has been apologizing for ever since. The tunnels under the water were left exactly as they were. Amtrak inherited the tunnel in the 1970s and owns it today. New Jersey Transit became its heaviest user, running commuter services through it from before dawn until after midnight. Traffic climbed steadily for a century, and nothing about the structure itself was ever upgraded because there was no way to upgrade it. Serious work meant closing a tube, and closing a tube meant strangling the corridor. So the tunnel was maintained the way you maintain something you cannot switch off. Patch what fails, replace what can be replaced overnight. Keep going. Engineers had been recommending a second crossing since the 1990s, and the recommendation never changed. Build it before the first one needs repairs. The politics never quite arrived. A new Hudson tunnel was always expensive, always somebody else's budget, and always less urgent than whatever was on fire that year. Then, at the end of the 2000s, one of those proposals finally got funded. The project was called Access to the Region's Core, and it came closer than anything before it. 2 new tunnels under the Hudson, feeding a new terminal beside Penn Station. Transit engineers hated the design because the new station would have been a dead end, buried deep beneath the existing one, and impossible to extend later. It was also under construction. Ground had been broken in 2009, contracts were signed, money was going into the ground, and the opening was set for 2018. In October 2010, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie canceled it. His reasoning was exposure to overruns. Federal money covered part of the project, but under the agreement, New Jersey carried the cost of anything above the estimate, and the overrun projections circulating at the time ran into the billions. He would not, he said, put the citizens of New Jersey behind what amounted to an open-ended letter of credit. Federal officials flew in to try to save it. The Transportation Secretary put alternative funding structures on the table and asked for 2 weeks to work through them. Christie took the 2 weeks, then killed the project permanently at the end of the month. Roughly $600 million had already been spent. The federal share went to projects in other states. State money committed to the tunnel was redirected into New Jersey's road program, which let the state avoid raising its fuel tax. A federal review published afterward concluded the overrun figures used to justify the cancellation had been considerably overstated. Years later, a different New Jersey governor, Phil Murphy, was asked about it on national television and did not soften the answer. He called it the biggest policy mistake in New Jersey in 50 years. The engineers who wanted that design dead got their wish, and the crossing being built today is the better one. It will open 25 years after the one that was canceled at roughly double the price, and the region spent the whole gap running on the tubes from 1910. 2 years after the cancellation, the ocean came in. Superstorm Sandy reached the New Jersey coast on the 29th of October, 2012, and pushed a surge up the Hudson that went over the Manhattan bulkhead and across 12th Avenue. The water found the rail yard on the west side. From the yard, it found a ramp that commuter trains use to get down to the tracks, and it went down the ramp. Roughly 13 million gallons of seawater went into the tunnels under both rivers that night, enough to fill 20 Olympic swimming pools, poured into holes whose entire purpose is keeping water out. In 2 of the tunnels under the East River, the water reached the ceilings. Under the Hudson, it stopped lower, around the level of the raised walkways that run along each side of the track. Every train service into New York City was canceled and stayed canceled for 5 days, while crews pumped the tunnels dry. The pumping was the straightforward part. It was done inside a week, everything was checked, and the trains started moving again. Publicly, that was the end of the story. The tunnels had flooded, the tunnels had been drained, and the system had come back faster than anyone expected. Underground, the real damage had only just started. Seawater does not sit politely in concrete and then leave when you pump it out. It leaves salt behind, and the salt goes to work on two things at once. It attacks the concrete itself, which swells and cracks from the inside, and it reaches the steel reinforcement buried in the structure and starts it rusting, which widens those cracks further, which lets in more water, which reaches more steel. There is no point at which the salt is used up. It has been running inside the walls of the Hudson tunnels since 2012, and it will keep running until the concrete is torn out and replaced. The visible results arrived within 2 years. Pieces of the bench wall, the concrete shelf running alongside the track, came loose and landed on the rails. The bench walls are not decorative. The electrical cables that power the tunnel run inside them. As the concrete opened up, water started reaching those cables, and in 2015, a series of them exploded. Trains stopped across the Northeast Corridor, and the repairs took weeks. An Amtrak spokesman, asked years later what the railroad could actually do about it, gave an answer with almost nothing in it. The tunnel has been there since 1910, he said, in one of the densest parts of the country. There is not a whole lot they can do. What they do instead is inspect it every night. Crews go in after the last train, walk the tubes looking for concrete that has shifted since yesterday, patch what they can reach, and get out before the first train of the morning. That window is the entire maintenance program. It is not enough time to fix anything properly. It is enough time to find out what is failing next. In 2014, the head of Amtrak was asked publicly how much longer the tunnel could carry traffic in this condition. He said about 20 years. The tunnel does not have to collapse for this to become a crisis. It only has to need fixing. Repairing the salt damage means stripping each tube back and rebuilding it from the walls in. None of that can happen around passing trains. The tube has to be empty, and Amtrak's estimate for how long each one would need to stay empty is around 2 years. 2 tubes, 2 years each. 4 years in which the region has a single track under the Hudson. This is where the design of 1910 turns into a problem nobody can solve. Each tube carries one track running one direction. Lose either one, and capacity does not have, it collapses because trains going both ways have to take turns through whatever is left. Amtrak has run the numbers. 24 trains an hour becomes 6. Everyone displaced from those trains has to reach Manhattan another way, and the road crossings have no room for them. The Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, and the George Washington Bridge are already full at peak. The estimated cost to the national economy of 4 years like that is around $16 billion, which is roughly what the replacement tunnel costs to build. An Amtrak executive was asked in front of New Jersey legislators whether a contingency plan existed for losing a tube. There was not one. There still is not. There is no need to imagine how that rebuild would go. It is already happening a mile away, under the other river. Sandy flooded 2 of the 4 East River tunnels that carry trains out to Queens and Long Island. Same salt, same night, same problem, and Amtrak has begun putting them right. Each damaged tube is being shut down for around 13 months while crews rebuild it. 4 tubes instead of 2 means this is meant to be the manageable version. Traffic squeezes into the 3 that remain. The railroad that uses them most did not see it that way. The Long Island Railroad runs several hundred trains a day through those tunnels, and its president said plainly that the plan risked wrecking the service. With 1 tube closed, 3 railroads would be competing for 3 tubes, running so close together through the rush hour that the slightest deviation could take the whole operation down. The work has produced its own surprises. When crews got inside and started installing the new overhead power system, they found voids in the concrete lining, air pockets sitting inside a structure everyone had assumed was solid. Nobody had known they were there because nobody had ever taken the tunnel apart to look. Schedules have moved. Politicians and transit executives who agree on almost nothing have united to complain about it. That is losing 1 tube out of 4. The replacement plan was announced in 2011, a few months after the previous one was canceled. The concept was the same one engineers had been recommending for 30 years. Build 2 new tunnels, move the trains into them, close the old ones one at a time, rebuild them properly, and bring them back. At the end of it, the region has 4 tracks under the river instead of 2, and for the first time in its history, a crossing that can be repaired without being shut down. It was priced at $13.5 billion. The first piece of it got built before almost anyone was paying attention, and it was not a tunnel at all. On the west side of Manhattan, a developer was preparing to build an entire new neighborhood over the rail yards. Towers, decks, foundations, all of it going into the precise ground the future tunnel would have to pass through. Once those foundations were in, the route was gone permanently. So in 2013, Amtrak started building a concrete box under the yard. No tunnel connected to it at either end. No train would use it for decades. It was a hole held open in advance, so the city rising overhead could not close it. 2 sections were finished by 2018, and the buildings went up on top of them. The third is being poured now, threading under a neighborhood that did not exist when the first section was started. The rest of the project spent a decade inside the American infrastructure funding system. It advanced, then stalled in 2017 when a federal official characterized it as a local project rather than a national one. It was revived under the following administration. In 2022, the cost was revised upward to $16 billion, and the opening date moved to 2035, with the rebuild of the old tunnel finishing in 2038. Construction finally began in November 2023, 13 years after the previous tunnel was canceled. The following summer, the federal government signed a funding agreement worth close to $7 billion, the largest transit grant ever awarded in the United States. For about 15 months, the project ran. Before any of that, there was a bridge, and it is the one part of this story where the system did what it was supposed to. A few miles west of the tunnel, the tracks crossed the Hackensack River. The structure carrying them was built at the same time as the tunnel by the same railroad. It was a swing bridge, which means the middle section pivoted sideways on a central pier to let boats through, then swung back and locked into place so trains could cross. Locking back into place was the part that stopped being reliable. The bridge was over a century old and still opening for river traffic several times a week. Every time it opened, every train on the corridor waited. Every so often, it failed to seat properly on the way back, and crews went out to hit the rails into alignment with sledgehammers while the entire northeast corridor backed up behind them. The replacement was included in the same program as the tunnel. Instead of another moving span, engineers built a fixed bridge high enough that boats pass underneath, removing the failure mode by removing the mechanism. It went into service in the spring of 2026, ahead of schedule. Trains now cross the Hackensack without anybody worrying about what the boats are doing. It went almost unreported outside New Jersey. What is happening underground now is the first serious tunneling under the Hudson in over a century, and the geology has not improved since Jacobs dealt with it. On the New Jersey side, the ground rises into the Palisades, a ridge of hard volcanic rock along the west bank. The tunnel has to go through it. That job belongs to 2 boring machines built to order in Germany. Each one weighs about as much as 4 fully loaded jumbo jets. The cutting head at the front is wide enough to swallow a 3-story building. Behind it, the trailing assembly of conveyors and control cabins runs back roughly the length of a city block, and once the thing is underground, 40 people work inside it. They arrived in pieces. Crews at North Bergen dug a trench 80 feet deep, and the machines are being welded together at the bottom of it. One engineer described the delivery as arriving like Lego. The rock ahead is genuinely difficult. It is abrasive enough to grind the cutting teeth down in a matter of days, which means crews have to climb into the head, replace them, and start again, over and over, for the entire drive. The survey also flagged a fault on the route, and faults are where water gets in. The machines are expected to advance about the length of a bus each day. The New Jersey run is a little over a mile and is expected to take roughly a year. On the Manhattan side, the problem inverts. There is barely any rock, just saturated ground, so crews are freezing it. Pipes are driven into the soil, and cold brine circulated through them until the water in the ground turns to ice and the whole mass is rigid enough to dig. Under the river, the mud that defeated Haskin is still there and still a problem. Crews on barges have spent seasons injecting grout into the silt to build a stabilized block for the machines to bore through. The work stops for part of each year so as not to disturb the sturgeon. In July 2026, the project found something else down there. Around 500 timber piles, left from a pier demolished long ago, standing upright in the riverbed, directly along the tunnel route. Some are whole tree trunks, 50 feet long. A boring machine hitting one is a serious problem, so every pile has to be found and pulled out individually before the drive under the river can begin. That work is scheduled to finish in time for tunneling to start in 2028. Nobody seriously disputes that the tunnel needs to exist. What a growing number of people dispute is the price. Of the $16 billion, around $14 goes toward building the new crossing. It is a pair of parallel tubes, carrying no stations, running a distance you could walk in an hour. London's Crossrail passes beneath the Thames twice and runs the width of a capital city. Its tunnels came in at around $500 million a mile. The Hudson crossing is priced at several times that. The researcher Elon Levy, who studies why American transit costs what it does, made the observation that cuts closest to the bone. On urban rail projects, stations are almost always where the money goes. Boring the tunnel between them is the cheap part. The Hudson project is building no stations at all, and it still costs multiples of the 2nd Avenue subway, which built 3 a few miles away in the same decade. The usual explanations get offered: fragmented contracting, overlapping agencies, environmental review measured in years, consultant-heavy management, labor arrangements. No other country replicates. None of that is unique to this tunnel, which is exactly the point. The same pattern shows up on California's high-speed rail, on the Honolulu line, in every decade and in every state. The commission running the project answers that the crossing sits under a working river between 2 of the densest cities in the country, and that it is being delivered against the budget it published. What stopped construction in 2026 had nothing to do with any of it. On the last day of September 2025, the federal government stopped paying. The stated reason was a review of the project's contracting practices, specifically its diversity requirements, which the administration's budget director argued were unconstitutional. The freeze covered around $18 billion across the Hudson Tunnel and a separate New York subway extension. The president stated publicly that the tunnel project was dead. The commission addressed every issue raised, certified compliance, and asked for the money. The money did not come, and the project kept going on a line of credit. That bought about 4 months. In mid-January, the president met the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. In the conversations that followed, an offer was made. The funding would be released if Schumer supported renaming Penn Station and Washington's Dulles Airport after the president. Schumer turned it down. His office pointed out that he had nothing to trade since the president had stopped the funding himself and could restart it whenever he chose, without any action from Congress. The offer was reported by 4 separate news organizations. The White House did not comment. The funding stayed frozen. At the start of February, the commission sued the federal government for breach of contract. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey filed a separate case the next day, asking a court to intervene before the project ran out of cash. It ran out on the 6th of February. Contractors were told to stop. Around 1,000 people were sent home. Every site went quiet, including the trench in North Bergen with the half-assembled boring machines sitting at the bottom of it. A stopped megaproject is not a paused one. Equipment leases run whether the equipment moves or not. Specialist crews take other work and do not necessarily come back. Excavations that need constant pumping still need constant pumping. State officials put the cost of standing still at somewhere between $15 and $20 million a month before counting what it would take to restart. Judge Jeanette Vargas ruled that same evening, ordering the government to resume payments. The government appealed within 48 hours, and the money was held again while the appeal was heard. On the 9th of February, laid-off construction workers held a rally in North Bergen on the ground they had been working the week before. The appeals court declined to block the order 3 days later. The withheld payments were released, crews were back on site before the end of the month, and the administration lost another attempt to halt funding in March. The case ran until the end of June, when Vargas made her order permanent. She wrote that the government had not seriously disputed that the freeze broke federal law, since none of the required procedures had been followed and the commission had never been given a chance to object. She also noted that although the Transportation Department had called it a compliance review, it had never actually found anything out of compliance, and that the president had said separately that he had personally decided to terminate the funding. Construction is running again. While all of that was moving through the courts, the old tunnel kept doing what it does. In late May 2026, an Amtrak work vehicle caught fire in one of the Hudson tubes at 1:30 in the morning. More than 140 emergency responders were needed to deal with it. 2 people were seriously hurt. Amtrak described the damage as significant. Service in and out of Penn Station was suspended entirely. Trains between New York and Washington stopped. Commuters spent the following Monday being diverted to Hoboken and told to find their own way across the river. One of the 2 tubes stayed out of service for days. The head of New York's Transit Authority did not bother being diplomatic afterward. That was the 3rd time in a matter of weeks, he said, that Penn Station had been knocked out. None of those incidents were the tunnel structurally failing. They were the ordinary consequences of running a corridor at capacity through century-old equipment that has been sitting in salt for 14 years. A disabled train in the wrong place. A fire in a confined space with one way out. A cable letting go. The timeline. Everything now depends on is this. The new tunnel opens in 2035. The rebuild of the old one finishes in 2038. Set that against the assessment from 2014 that the existing tunnel had roughly 20 years left in it. That estimate expires around 2034. If the schedule holds perfectly and the estimate was accurate, the margin is about a year. Boring under the river has not started. The last of the major contracts were awarded only recently. The funding has already been switched off once and can be switched off again. There is a version of the next decade where the machines break through on schedule. The new tubes open in 2035, and the old ones get rebuilt one at a time with a spare crossing available. There is another version where a cable lets go, or a wall comes down, or the ocean gets into the tunnel again, and that repair has to happen without one. $16 billion is being spent on a crossing that will not carry a passenger for another 9 years. Everything happening underground between now and then would be recognizable to the sandhogs. Frozen soil in Manhattan, silt under the river that has to be turned into something solid before anything can pass through it. Rock hard enough to destroy cutting teeth in 2 days. Timber piles pulled out of the riverbed one at a time because a tree trunk left down there a century ago is enough to stop a machine that weighs as much as 4 aircraft. Above all of it, the trains keep running through the old tubes. 200,000 people a day in the dark for 30 seconds past concrete that crews patched the night before. The instruments Charles Jacobs installed in 1907 are long gone. The condition he measured with them is not. Twice a day, the tide comes up the Hudson and presses down on the tunnels. Twice a day, it goes back out and lets them rise. They were never pinned to the bedrock because a railroad executive concluded in the spring of 1908 that the anchors would do more harm than good. He may well have been right. The tunnel has been moving with the river for 116 years and it has not broken yet. It is doing it right now, under the boats, under the boring machines, under everything being built to replace it. Do you think the new tunnel will open before the old one gives out? Should infrastructure this critical ever have been allowed to run this long without a backup? And is $16 billion a fair price for a crossing you could walk in an hour, or a symptom of something badly wrong with how America builds? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, check out our video on the biggest megaproject disasters in US history. Keep following SIGNUM for more stories from the world's greatest megaprojects.